Hello, Montana, and hello, world. I'm Chris Hislop, the Executive Director here at the Montana World Affairs Council, and this is Connect Montana, where we bring the world to Montana, and Montana to the world. Today marks the very last event in our spring series. We've been talking about Asia, nationalism, Indigenous issues, immigration, and a host of other issues that matter to Montana and to Montanans. Now, if you missed any of our previous 67 shows, you can see them on our YouTube channel. All of our webcasts come to you thanks to the generous support of our sponsors, the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Allegiance, and Stockman Bank. Very shortly, I'll introduce our guest, Mr. Aqqaluk Lynge. Mr. Lynge will speak for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have a short question and answer period with you, the audience. In order to send questions, please use the chat function in Zoom. If you're not familiar with that, on the Zoom window, there's a small icon on the bottom that looks like a speech bubble. If you click that, a window opens on the right side of your screen, and on the bottom of that window, you can type in a question, and I'll receive that question. So I'll curate all of your questions and choose those that are in keeping with our nonpartisan character and relevant to today's topic. My colleague Julie is also on, and she will be chatting in some messages as well. So I suggest you click that chat button, leave the chat window open so you can see what's going on back and forthing during the event. She'll also ask you for your email address if you would like to receive one follow-up email with different links to articles relating to today's show. If you give your email, I assure you we do not put it on our big mailing list unless you want that. This is only for one follow-up email. So I'm very honored to introduce today's guest. Born in Northern Greenland, Aqqaluk Lynge has had important influence in international Inuit cooperation for more than a generation, representing Inuit of Alaska, Canada, Greenland, and Russia in the Arctic Council and in the United Nations. He served both as a member of parliament and as a minister of various portfolios. Mr. Lynge is widely published, having written books of poetry, essays, and on politics. He's also contributed to several works and anthologies written in English, Greenlandic, French, and Nordic languages, and is an author and publisher of a Greenlandic literary magazine. Mr. Lynge was an appointed expert member at the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and chaired the Inuit Circumpolar Council. Welcome, Mr. Lynge. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
It's great to have you on, and as our guests probably know, you're on from Greenland, and so it's a little bit later in the evening, so thank you for joining us in your evening. I wanted to start by saying, you know, of course, Greenland is really on the forefront of climate change issues. This is, for all of us, a critical transnational, and if I could say, a transcultural issue. But here in Montana, it can seem very far away, but we're very fortunate to have you here to give us a little clearer picture of the situation for people in the Circumpolar North. And you know, we all know that these are real issues for people who live there, but we'd also like to know how these issues impact you, the people of the North, and how they impact us. So I wonder if you could start by sharing your views on the situation in Greenland and the Circumpolar North and that of the Inuit people. What can we learn from this situation, and how can we understand what's going on there in a seemingly very large issue, but in more human terms? So over to you, Mr. Lynge.
Thank you so much. I thank the Montana World Affairs Council and Connect Montana for the invitation to speak at this live interactive webcast. I want you to, for a short moment, to look at the map of the Circumpolar Arctic that shows the territories of the indigenous peoples of the Arctic. As you see, the Inuit are occupying the vast areas spanning from Greenland to the Canadian Arctic and northern and western Alaska and the Chukotka Peninsula across the Bering Strait in Russia. In the Russian Arctic alone, over 20 different indigenous peoples have their residence. In the Arctic, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and the Kola Peninsula, Russia, the Sami people are living as citizens of 4 different countries, just as the Inuit are divided in 4 national states. Since early 1990s, the Inuit Circumpolar Council, the Sami Council, and the Russian Association of the People of the North have been working together as equal NGOs. With the formation of the Arctic Council in 1996, we were joined by 3 other Arctic indigenous organizations as permanent participants in the 8 Arctic states Arctic Council. The unique cooperation covers the whole circumpolar area with the unique cooperation covers the whole circumpolar area with a combined population of around 4 million people, where indigenous people total 500,000 and Inuit count around 170,000. The harsh climate and the vast territory is the reason for its relatively small population. The industrial cities are centered on mining and fossil fuel development, populated by workers from the south, and the rest is residing in military air bases. We, the indigenous peoples, that have lived here for thousands of years, have been able to survive because of our culture is centered on the use of living resources. We exist today in a world like any others, dependent of all the necessities of the modern world, and we cannot survive without the wise use of our living resources based on sustainable development. Our languages and culture and our way of life is threatened by the accelerating warming of the Arctic, and we are at the center of the climate emergency. I have had the privilege to be part of the leadership of the ICC since its official inauguration in 1980, and retired only in 2014 after serving as its international chair and president for 10 years. I have traveled extensively all over the Arctic and was instrumental in reaching out to our kinsmen in the former Soviet Union during the end of the Cold War. Since my youth, I have known leaders from the indigenous world through the NGO work and mainly via United Nations Human Rights Council, where we lobbied for establishment of UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues starting from 2002. I was an expert member from 2004 and 6 and cooperated with indigenous leaders and government representatives from all over the world for 25 years in drafting the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, finally adopted by United Nations General Assembly in September 13th, 2007. The indigenous peoples are now part of the world's democratic institutions that we ourselves have fought for and achieved, and our voices can be heard. But there is absolutely no guarantee for full participation in the decision-making process in our daily life. We are citizens of our nation states, where we have our daily struggle to define our place in society and secure our civil and human rights, and our fight for self-determination is paramount in our lives. Inuit in the Western world are living in democratic countries and have achieved different kinds of self-determination. In the case of Inuit in Greenland, we have fought for our rights and have been able to negotiate with our former colonizers and gained autonomy within the Danish realm. We were able to establish the self-government in 2009, leaving defense, judiciary, and monetary and international affairs to the Danish government. In its preamble, it states that Greenland have a right to independence, but that such decision has to be endorsed by both the Greenlandic and Danish parliaments, but that Greenland remains part of the Kingdom of Denmark. It is by far the most comprehensive agreement made between indigenous peoples at any state's government. Greenland and Denmark share 300 years of history, beginning with a Christian mission and colonization. This collision of worldviews had a devastating influence on our lives. Our ancestors' culture evaporated. The first contacts also resulted in decimation of our population caused by pandemics like the smallpox that ravaged our coast repeatedly for more than several hundred years until vaccination became available. We experienced drastic change from the shamanistic rituals to that of the Christendom, and today we have adopted Lutheran Christianity, incorporating our own music into Greenlandic hymns and cultural expressions that include music, art, and sports. Our wish for self-determination have been nurtured by more than 150 years of experience in developing democratic infrastructure in our society, and we are proud of our achievements. Our home, the Arctic, land and sea, have been changed forever, not only because of the melting ice cap in Greenland, not only because of the shrinking sea ice cover in Canada, not only because of the eroding shores of Alaska and the increased shipping along the coast of Chukotka, Russia, but also because of the intense interest that the Arctic region is generating now and will generate forever. Everyone these days sees opportunities in the Arctic and seems to want a piece of the Arctic. Arctic states see opportunities to make sovereignty claims. Industry sees opportunities to exploit new resources and to discover simpler transportation routes. Academics see new research opportunities, and tourists see previously unexplored vistas. Add to these uniquely Arctic-focused impacts the more general impact of the superpowers rivalry, and one is left with no other conclusion that the Arctic has been changed forever. Since World War II, Greenland have been part of the US and NATO defense, allowing American Air Force bases in Greenlandic soil based on agreements between the US and Danish government, and subsequently amended by a trilateral agreement in 2004, including the Greenland government as an equal partner. This was initiated by Republican Secretary of State Colin Powell and his Greenlandic colleague Joseph Motsville. It was therefore a surprising insult by the US president when he, in 2019, in full public, announced his intention to buy Greenland. It was rebuffed by the Danish premier as absurd, and subsequently the president annulled a planned state visit invited by the Queen of Denmark. This was the second insult in a few days to one of the most dedicated allies in Europe as well as in the Arctic. This, in my mind, immoral assault on Greenland's sovereignty by a superpower ally also resulted in changed public perception of the US in Greenland, and the goodwill that Greenlanders have had to the US has been changed subsequently. It did not help much when the US ambassador to Denmark did not stop her aggressive interference in Greenland resource policies by announcing US interest in rare earth resources. It actually provoked an environmental movement and got the broad public to openly oppose the plans for a uranium mine in the town of Narsaq in South Greenland, where an Australian mining company, supported by a state-owned Chinese company, was planning to open a mine whose byproduct was uranium. In this April, general elections resulted in a new government led by Left Green Party, Inuit of Alaska, who is opposing the opening of the uranium mine and stands for zero tolerance policy on mining with uranium content. But the new government are not opposing mining of rare earth resources as long as it has no uranium content, and the environment hearing process are done throughout, and that Greenland companies are partners, and that Greenland is secured income through taxes and royalties. But as the case shows, the Greenlandic public are very aware of that the environment consequences should be minimal, and that we will not allow large-scale mining or opening up for more fossil fuel development on our coasts. Inuit are maritime indigenous peoples of the Arctic. Our unique knowledge and comprehensive understanding of the Arctic is unsurpassed, and there's no one in the world who cares more about what happens in the Arctic than we do. We believe in negotiating and forming partnership, even with those who have colonized us and have attempted to take our lands and seas from us. Inuit have entered into various self-government arrangements and land claims agreement with Arctic states. While we are a single people with a strong sense of unity, we also have a long-standing ties to Russian Federation, to the US, and to Canada. We have a strong connection to Europe through Greenland. Although Greenland opted out of the European Community in 1985 because of our fishing interests, we are associated to the EU with separate arrangements. Sorry for my throat. One short pause. So who are Inuit? We are people who rely on traditional knowledge as well as Western science. We hunt seals and whales and use Arctic plants. We eat seal meat and salt seal skin and create clothes and work of art from the parts of animals that we don't use. We have been taught by our parents and grandparents to conserve our flora and fauna and use them in a wise and sustainable manner. Inuit are committed to bring active partners in the new Arctic, not only so that some of the economic benefits are fairly enjoyed by us, but because we fear that if we are not partners and we are not at the table, then the Arctic physical, cultural, and social environments will suffer irreversible harm. It's our intimate knowledge of the Arctic and our commitment to the health and well-being of our Arctic home that together justify our position regarding our responsibility. Your responsibility is to work in partnership with Inuit because we know the Arctic and we live there in the corner of human existence, and we are committed to safeguarding the well-being of the Arctic. Thank you for listening.
Mr. Lynge, thank you very much for those remarks. And I have to say, for me, one of the best parts of what I do here at the Montana World Affairs Council is to get engaged in issues that are very new to me, things that I know very little about, this being one of them. And so I've had a great opportunity to learn more before having this event. So I have a list of questions, as long as my arm, but what I'd like to remind our participants is to please chat in your questions to Mr. Lynge. It's very rare that we get somebody of such extraordinary expertise in such an important issue and an important part of our planet. So I really want to encourage you to use that chat function and send me questions that I can curate. And then we'll be asking them. I also just want to welcome very quickly all of our Facebook Live viewers. A lot of people are not on live here on Zoom, but they're watching via Facebook. So you're very welcome. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so Mr. Lynge, I'm going to start with a question from our participants. It says, could you please talk about the role of tourism in the Arctic?
Yeah. Well, because of the pandemic right now, of course, there's problems with connecting us to the international air connections. And because we are very cautious about the pandemic, our international connections have been cut, and it's only starting now. So we hope that that there will be a few tourists here this summer or later in the late summer. And I can tell you on the question of future development, if the pandemic is over someday, there will be at least one international connection directly to Nuuk, where I live, where I speak from right now, from 2023. And maybe a year or two after, there will be direct connections to Inuit up north, not far from my hometown. And we are looking at developing the tourist industry faster than we can. I think that it is important that a part of our economy should be centered on tourism. But of course, the other question is how much cruise ship tourism should take place. That's a more a question of protecting the environment, and also that we have a policy in the whole Arctic not to use specific fuel that are generating more CO2 emissions in the Arctic than we want. So we should have a cautious approach to that, but it's something that we have been discussing in the 8-state membership Arctic Council, and in a few days from now, they will meet. The foreign ministers will meet in Iceland, and questions like how fast we should open the tourism after the pandemic restrictions is open for discussion now. Long answer.
Mr. Lynge, I also you mentioned the Arctic Council, and so I have this will come to a question, but just in a moment, because my impression when I hear you talk about not just the geography but the issues relating to the circumpolar north, that you immediately see that the interconnections. And not just simple interconnections. Of course, there are at the center the people who live there, and then there are the nations which surround it. And then, as you said, and you mentioned, private sector interest in resources, in tourism. You also have a number of multinational and multilateral organizations who are involved in so many of these interconnected issues. It's it seems from a structural standpoint a very complicated group that one must be working through in order to deal with these issues that are affecting everybody involved. So that's a long preamble to the question from another participant who asks, can you describe in further detail the structure and function of the Arctic Council? Is it the same as the Conference or Council of the Circumpolar North?
No, no. It was actually initiated in the 80s by the end of the Soviet Union by the Russian President Gorbachev when he talked about the Arctic as a peace area where there's no weapons, where we have a peaceful cooperation. So then the Finnish government in the end of 1980s and beginning of the 1990s started something that we, the Inuit Circumpolar Council, actually have lobbied for, namely the cooperation on environment issues. And through that environmental cooperation came an idea that the 8 Arctic states, namely Canada, United States, Russia, Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, together with Faroe Island and Iceland, and finally Greenland, have organized a cooperation between the states. Besides that, the 8 Arctic states decided to invite the original inhabitants of the Arctic, which is the indigenous peoples. And the indigenous peoples were able to organize themselves, so they represented several entities like Inuit Circumpolar Council, representing Inuit of Greenland, Canada, Alaska, United States, and Russia. So that way, we also invited the Sami Council of Scandinavia, that also exists on 4 countries. So that way, the participation of indigenous peoples were accepted because we were part of the scientific work groups already, looking at the climate change, looking at the environment degradation that actually took place, and also, most importantly, that the Arctic Ocean that we all share is affecting all the Arctic people's lives. So it is a unique, Arctic Council is a very unique organization. And like I said, there will be a meeting of Arctic Council of Ministers. We have every 3 years something called Arctic Council Ministers meeting, and it's usually foreign ministers that are going to meet, and they're going to meet here in a few days in Iceland, where Russia will take over the chairmanship, because the chairmanship rotates, and we, the indigenous organizations, are sitting together with the governments, which is very unique, because we are recognized as the only occupants of this the Arctic area, and our connection to the sea and ocean is also very, very important. You don't think that sometimes people think, well, there must be a lot of people living in the Arctic. Actually, no. Like I said, we only count around a little over 4 million people living in that area. If you look at the map, you'll see that there is room for lots of things happening there. But the harsh climate itself, the winter, the ice, is excluding any industrial, large industrial development, and any interference in the nature itself have dire consequences. That's why climate change is creating a havoc all over the Arctic Ocean, affecting all of us living in the borderline of the circumpolar area.
Well, not surprisingly, we're getting a lot more questions here. So I'm going to try to sneak one of my own questions in here, Mr. Lynge, because I was very interested to read and then to hear your remarks about resource extraction in the North, in the Arctic. And I heard you, talk about the importance of engaging the people who live there in this. And interestingly, what I didn't hear was that you don't want this, that this is somehow, trying to keep oil, energy, mineral extraction, and the required infrastructure. Of course, it's not simply, a tube, but you need all kinds of infrastructure in order to extract these things. You mentioned that there's an intense interest and a lot of opportunities in this, but that comes attendant with, a kind of, I don't know, the companies have a certain interest in their profit. Nations will have a certain interest in the revenue that's generated and the power that's generated. I think I'm safe in saying our world doesn't have a great record in terms of protecting people from, extensive resource extraction and the dangers therein. But now you talk about the Arctic Council and the other things that the indigenous people do. Can you tell us a little bit about? Do you feel like the proper safeguards are in place to allow for more resource extraction? And if so, what does that mean for the people who live there?
We have several questions here. First of all, if the industry wants to expand its operations going to the Arctic, they have to have a program, and they have to have a better knowledge of where they are. So it is important that the people that actually live there day and night, summer and winter, that they are approached by those companies, and also that you talk to the governments and accept the indigenous people's interest in that. So accept that there are certain international cooperative instruments that you have to look at, and that concerns climate, it concerns environment, it concerns sustainable use of our resources, living resources at sea and on land. So there's you cannot just walk in like without knocking at the door. So I think that the Arctic peoples have learned from the resource development the last 50 years how not to do it. So it is not surprisingly very positive, accepted, and seen when President Biden appointed Deb Haaland as Minister of or Secretary of Interior, that will have a better connect to the United States indigenous peoples that have been overlooked for so long time. So I'm sure that for Montana, it is also for the Blackfeet people a very important issue. So all the indigenous peoples around the world are looking at Biden's policy on that, and also the fact that an indigenous person and very fine person like Deb Haaland has been appointed secretary. Concerning like the Greenland situation, we have a government, we have a strong government, and we have all the mineral rights in Greenland. And in Greenland, we have accepted that the earth and the land and the sea are collectively owned by Greenlanders, all Greenlanders. All of us that live here, both indigenous peoples and non-indigenous peoples here in Greenland, have accepted that we have, as a society, a collective ownership of land. This is very important, as it is the reason why you have agreements with self-determination, with reservations in the lower 48 in the United States, as well with indigenous peoples and Inuit and Alaska natives in Alaska. So that way, we have shown that ownership of land and the right to negotiate with mining companies, and also to follow international instruments like the rights of indigenous peoples accepted by United Nations in 2007, that those are the rules that we follow. We also have the international ILO Convention 169 and accepted by International Labour Organization. So those rules have to be also adopted by all the Arctic states. It's not been the case like the Russia and United States have been out of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We hope that the Biden administration look at it like Obama did, and also do something based on these international instruments that are governing the way that we deal with governments and indigenous peoples. So when you look at indigenous peoples' interest, we want to have a world guided by the principles of human rights, by the principles of accepting our home in the Arctic as something sacred for us, because if you don't accept that, and the climate change and the warming of Arctic continues, then it will have devastating precautions for the low-lying laying areas in the whole world. So therefore, for us in the Arctic, for especially Greenlanders that are sitting on top of the ice cap, that we tell the rest of the world, please be careful. Our life is not something that we can just like kids play out of. It is a serious question also to live in the area that we represent. So therefore, we count ourselves as the only ones, because we live there in the Arctic as the ones that should be safeguarding the well-being of the Arctic. And the indigenous peoples around the world, I know, they also look at their lands and their territories as their responsibility to safeguard the well-being of their areas. So if the world have listened much earlier to what indigenous peoples were telling them, then we will not be here where we are today with the climate emergency.
And I'll just add to that very quickly that that's a message we've heard over and over this spring in our series here at Connect Montana. We've had a number of events with Indigenous guests talking about things like racial equity, talking about human trafficking, talking about language and culture. And this is a message we're hearing, loud and clear. And I couldn't agree with you more. Another part of this spring series has been looking at Asia. And we've got a very interesting question here for you, Mr. Lynge. Has China made overtures to the people and government of Greenland, aside from its joint venture mining enterprises? Is the People's Republic of China offering economic aid or educational investment, presumably in order to extract resources or to in any way use the Arctic?
Well, not yet, not in that manner, but we know that the situation is changing, and the superpowers rivalry in the Arctic are a continuing issue for all of us. And it is important that we talk to our ally, United States, on these issues, and also that we are aware from the interest of special interest of Russia and China. For China, it is important that to understand that for us it would be problematic to invite China in Greenland when you know the interest of United States, and that we not only on military but also in so many, especially the resource extraction question. So we are very aware of the Chinese interest and also their talk of their Silk Road, and there might be also a talk of polar silk development. But also China is trying to define itself as a near polar area as well. So if you look at the map and change a little bit in the middle of that, Greenland will always be there, and provoking everyone everywhere in the world. And I think for the interest of the Greenlandic self-government and our wish for self-determination, that right now their interest in uranium mining is via companies have been a big issue, and we don't want that. So if they want any engagement, they should also ask the government of Greenland what their wishes are for development of that kind. And and also it's been a question of discussion between Denmark and Greenland, because we actually our own telecommunications company invited YY to be partner in laying out an undersea connection from Nuuk to Asia up north. So therefore, the telecommunications, that part of it, have been established by partnership with Chinese companies. And it's also been a question with Canada, because Greenland could actually be a bridge between the Canadian North from Nuuk to Iqaluit in Nunavut, but the Canadian government have said that because our connection from Nuuk up north to the northern coast of Greenland, it has created some problems for them. So yes, the Chinese involvement in a few joint ventures have already caused a lot of problem, and for Greenland, we have to tiptoe among the superpower interests whenever we talk about the telephone, our connections. So you see, yes, we have to be careful. And first of all, I think it is important for United States to understand that we are full partners in the same interest in defense issues, and also as members of the NATO, that we are not seen as someone who want to open Greenland to all kinds of businesses. We are very careful, and therefore I think it is wise from the point of view of the new U.S. government that they have they see us as partners and also discuss openly about the questions that are concerning them and us. So it's time to look at the matters in a way where there is a seriousness and also respect for Greenland and for the small population that we have been able to live here for so long time in a peaceful manner with our neighbors like Canada and United States.
I think we have time for one last question, if I could. And I want to pick up on your last remarks there, Mr. Lynge, because, I mean, as you know, watching the situation here in America, we've had a very divisive social and political discussion going on here, between different groups. But when I hear you and when I read about the Arctic Council and I read a little bit about this idea of the one Arctic, one immediately sees this thing where there's the issues and the peoples and the nations are interconnected, but there's also a lot of divisions, or you could say that, as you said, there's land, there's ice, there's water, there's different nations, there's subnational groups, there are corporations. And so there are many ways that one could divide it, yet somehow you seem to have forged a way in which you can bring these voices in which people who live there can be considered, obviously, as they should be, equals in a discussion about anything that goes on there and the future. And so, admittedly, a difficult question, but Mr. Lynge, what can we learn from that kind of cooperation, from that kind of undoubtedly compromise, and being able to sit at a table with a very diverse group of people and to conclude on things that are important to everyone? And what could we learn from that?
I think, yes, I've seen and also met indigenous peoples from around the world and also from Asia. And I don't have any problem with discussing issues with China and with other governments that have a completely different viewpoint. But I think for the sake of the earth and for the sake of the survival of the Arctic as it is, then it is important to look at the Arctic experience, because I think the Arctic states have done a lot of things and been open to indigenous peoples in a way that no indigenous peoples around the world have experienced. So that cooperation internationally have taken place in good conscience for all of us. I think if you look at it, that how much can a small NGO like Inuit Circumpolar Council actually, or the Sami Council, or the Russian Association of Indigenous Peoples actually achieve? We can actually achieve a lot of things. We have been part of the Stockholm Convention on the Elimination of Persistent Organic Pollutants. And we have been able to establish have been instrumental in establishing Arctic Environment Protection Strategy. And we have been active in United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and also worked with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And we have made submissions to the Convention of Biological Diversity. And we have participated actively in the International Union for Conservation of Nature and the United Nations Environment Program. So this is how small people, a small association in the world can actually do, because we are committed to that, and because we feel we have a responsibility to teach and to work with people and governments so they can understand what the whole world is all about, how our understanding of the world view actually is, and why we have survived in the Arctic so long time. So, compared to the colonized areas all over the world, where Europeans and other colonizers have come to a place and then changed everything. Now we see with the climate emergency that you cannot deal with nature and the lives of the human being the way that we have done. So please listen to indigenous peoples. Please listen to the pollen.
I can't think of a better way. Mr. Lynge, I apologize for interrupting there. I just can't think of a better way to kind of wrap up with that message, which is one, we've tried to amplify here over this past series. And I just want to say from my part that, the issues that you raise here and that we talked about today are so big and so important. Sometimes they're so big one can feel completely overwhelmed by them, and being overwhelmed can lead to some pessimism and lead to a certain feeling of there's nothing that can be done. But your message to me today and to us is that's not really the case. There's plenty that can and is being done and needs to be done on these things. And I have to say, I come away with a great sense of optimism, not just on those issues, but I want to say the way in which the Arctic Council and the ICC has operated, engaged in this kind of collaboration, working together with a very diverse group of people. It seems difficult at sometimes, especially in this day and age, and especially here in America, but it does happen. It is successful, and it can succeed on very important issues, as you and your colleagues and your friends and your network have proven over the past 2 decades. So I had to add that, and in special thanks to you very much for joining us on this show. We really appreciate it. Let me just very quickly then wrap up and not only thank Mr. Lynge, but thank our very generous sponsors at the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Allegiance, and Stockman Bank. So as I said, this is our last event of the spring series. So we'll kick off again next fall. If you missed any of the 68 webcasts that we had with over 5,500 participants, check it out on YouTube, please. This summer, I will have a series of very short programs, 5 to 10 minutes on key issues, but we won't engage in these longer programs again until next fall. And for those of you who are friends and members of the Montana World Affairs Council, if the situation is agreeable, we hope to have in-person events next fall as well. So if you have any thoughts, any ideas that you would like to share with me and the Montana World Affairs Council, please send me an email at info@montanaworldaffairs.org. Let me know what you think about this program and others. So finally, once again, Mr. Lynge, I am so pleased that you could join us. I thank you very kindly for coming on to the show.
Thank you so much. And I say big hello to Browning, Montana.
That's right. Well, our good friend Diana Bird, who is the Global Educator of the Year from Browning, Montana, who joined us as well on Connect Montana not long ago. So again, to all the participants as well, to you, Mr. Lynge, and to our sponsors, thank you very much. Be well, everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.